Here's a thought experiment. Imagine you wake up tomorrow and everything is gone. No grocery stores, no running water, no factory that makes your clothes, no hospital 5 miles away, no electricity. Just you, a group of about 30 people you've known your whole life, and everything the landscape around you has to offer. What do you actually do? What does your day look like? What takes time and what takes almost no time at all? That's not a hypothetical. That's a description of human life for the vast majority of our existence as a species. And anthropologists have spent the last 60 years actually measuring it, tracking how hunter-gatherers divide their time, what specific tasks take how long, and what the results say about us. The answers are surprising. Some things that seem simple turn out to be enormously time-consuming. Some things that seem hard take almost no effort at all. And the overall picture of how prehistoric humans spent their days challenges almost everything we assume about work, productivity, and what it means to be busy. The question isn't how hard prehistoric humans worked, it's what they were actually doing, and for how long. Let's start with the number everyone knows, and why it's wrong. In 1966, at a now famous anthropology symposium called Man the Hunter, held at the University of Chicago, anthropologist Marshall Salins made a claim that shocked his field. Based on field work among the Jew/Hawanzi of the Kalahari Desert, conducted by Richard Lee, he argued that hunter-gatherers worked only about 15 to 20 hours per week to meet their subsistence needs. He called them the original affluent society. The claim spread everywhere. It became one of the most cited ideas in popular anthropology. There's just one problem. The number only counted food acquisition. Time spent hunting, time spent gathering. That's it. When later researchers added up everything, food preparation, cooking, tool making, shelter maintenance, childcare, water collection, hide processing, the number came out to around 40 to 45 hours per week, roughly equivalent to a standard modern work week. Not 15 hours, more like 40 to 45. So, why does this matter? Because the question isn't the total hours, it's what those hours actually consisted of, and that's where the story gets genuinely interesting. It wasn't 15 hours a week. With everything included, it was closer to 40 to 45, but the composition of those hours was completely different from ours. Let's go task by task. The first and most obvious job, getting food. For most hunter-gatherer groups, this breaks down roughly as follows. Men spent the majority of their out-of-camp time hunting, tracking, and in many groups collecting honey, one of the highest calorie foods available. Women spent their out-of-camp time gathering, tubers, berries, fruits, leaves, eggs, insects. The split in time varied significantly by group and season. Among the Hadza of Tanzania, men averaged around 4 to 7 hours of out-of-camp activity per day. Women averaged somewhat less, partly because childcare kept them closer to camp. Among the Agta of the Philippines, studied intensively by a team from Cambridge University who lived with 359 individuals across 10 communities for 2 years, adults spent around 24 hours per week on out-of-camp subsistence work. Here's what makes hunting's time budget complicated. A significant fraction of hunting trips return empty-handed. Among the Hadza, large game, a giraffe or zebra, appears roughly once a month. Most days, hunters return with smaller animals or honey. Occasionally, nothing. This means that hunting is not like farming, where effort and yield are relatively predictable. Hunting is closer to fishing or venture investing. High variance, occasional large payoffs, frequent 0 days. The time investment looks different from the outside than it is in practice. And now, a question I want you to leave in the comments. If you had to spend a week doing only one type of work without any screens, meetings, or emails, something physical, something with your hands, something where you can see the direct result, what would you choose? I'm genuinely curious about the answers, and I think they'll cluster around something most people don't get enough of in their regular work. Back to the task list. Food once brought back to camp was not ready to eat. Processing took time. Tubers had to be dug out of the ground, which required knowing where to look and often significant physical effort with a digging stick against rocky soil. They then had to be prepared, cleaned, cooked, or processed to remove toxins. Some root vegetables eaten by hunter-gatherers contain compounds that require prolonged cooking or fermentation to neutralize. Meat required butchering, removing the hide, separating cuts, dealing with organs. For large animals, this was a multi-person job taking several hours. The meat then needed to be processed further, consumed immediately, cooked over fire, or preserved by drying in the sun or smoking over coals. Research among the Hadza documents that both women and men consumed a significant portion of food in the field before returning to camp. Fitzpatrick's study found that Hadza women ate and shared over 800 kilocalories outside camp per day. Burbesque and colleagues documented similar patterns for men. This wasn't cheating the group. It was rational, carrying heavy loads while simultaneously fueling the body that was doing the carrying. Food acquisition was just the beginning. Processing it, preparing, cooking, preserving, often took as long as finding it. Now let's talk about the task that most people forget entirely: tool making and maintenance. This was not a casual activity. It was skilled, time-consuming work, and the quality of your tools could be the difference between eating and not eating, or between surviving an encounter with a large animal and not. Stone tool knapping, the process of shaping flint, obsidian, or chert into blades, arrowheads, or scrapers, is not something anyone can do adequately without training. Research on contemporary practitioners and experimental archaeologists consistently shows that becoming genuinely proficient takes months to years of practice. Beginners waste enormous amounts of raw material and produce tools that are functionally inferior. A skilled knapper can create an arrowhead in roughly 30 to 45 minutes. A more complex tool, a carefully shaped knife or a bifacial hand axe, could take several hours. And tools needed constant maintenance. Every use dulled an edge that needed to be resharpened. Hunting arrows needed their hafting inspected, their fletching replaced, their tips retouched. Because of the time and skill required, tool making was one of the first forms of specialization in human history. Some group members made better tools than others. That skill was valued, recognized, and likely compensated through preferential food sharing, through social status, through access to mates. The first professional identity in human history was probably the person who makes the best arrowheads. Next, hide processing. This is the most labor-intensive domestic task that rarely gets discussed in popular accounts of prehistoric life, and the numbers are genuinely striking. Processing a single animal hide into usable leather or clothing material was not a quick job. The hide had to be removed from the animal intact, scraped clean of fat and membrane, dehaired, and then treated to prevent decay and maintain flexibility. Traditional brain tanning, using the animal's own brain matter mixed with water, required working the hide repeatedly over many hours while it dried, stretching and kneading to keep the fibers from hardening. For a deer hide, this typically took 1 to 2 full days of intermittent work. For larger animals, longer. Archaeological evidence places hide processing as far back as at least 70,000 years ago, based on the distinctive wear patterns found on flint scraping tools. Ethnographic records from dozens of cultures show that in most cold climate or temperate hunter-gatherer groups, hide processing was among the most time-demanding regular activities, performed primarily by women. A single set of functional clothing might represent multiple hides. Each hide represents days of work. This is why clothing, in the prehistoric world, was not a fashion item. It was a significant capital investment in time and labor. A single animal hide took 1 to 2 full days to process into usable material. Clothing was not fashion. It was a capital investment. Now, shelter. Hunter-gatherers didn't build permanent structures, but they did build temporary shelters, and the efficiency with which they did so is remarkable. The Hadza of Tanzania can construct a functional sleeping shelter in under an hour. The Kung San build dome-shaped grass huts in roughly 2 to 3 hours. These structures are designed to be abandoned, not improved. The key insight? Investing 20 hours in a structure you'll leave in 3 weeks is irrational. Building something functional in 2 hours is not laziness, it's optimization. The economic logic of mobility imposed deliberate minimalism. Fewer possessions, less to carry, less to maintain, less to repair. What looks like poverty from the outside functions as efficiency from the inside. Childcare, the invisible labor. In modern societies, childcare is primarily the responsibility of the nuclear family, specifically the mother. This is, anthropologically speaking, a very unusual arrangement. Among hunter-gatherers, childcare is distributed across the group. This is what anthropologists call alloparenting, the practice of non-parental group members contributing to the care and raising of children. Grandmothers, aunts, older siblings, and unrelated adults all participate. Children, after roughly age 6 or 7, become partially self-supervising and begin supervising younger children themselves. The result is that the time burden of childcare on any individual, including the biological mother, is significantly lower than in a nuclear family system. This has real consequences for women's ability to forage and otherwise contribute to group subsistence. The AGTA study found that women in foraging camps had similar leisure time to men, despite doing more in-camp domestic work, partly because alloparenting distributed the childcare load. The grandmother hypothesis, the idea that postmenopausal women increase group fitness by contributing to grandchild care and food provisioning, is directly connected to this pattern. Older women, freed from reproduction, could be among the highest value members of the group precisely because of what they contributed to the childcare system. Hunter-gatherer childcare was distributed across the entire group, not assigned to the mother alone. This changed everything about how much time women had for other work. And now, the second comment question. Think about the last time you did something that had a completely visible, concrete result by the end of the day. Not a deliverable, not a project. Something where you could look at what existed at the end that didn't exist at the beginning. When was that, and how did it feel compared to a day where everything was invisible? Emails sent, meetings attended, documents reviewed. Drop it in the comments. I think the pattern in the answers will be interesting. Now, social labor. This is the category that almost never appears in time budget accounting, but it was central to everything. Maintaining relationships required constant active investment. Sharing food according to the group's norms. Resolving disputes before they escalated. Reciprocating favors. Tracking who owed what to whom. Dunbar's social brain hypothesis holds that the neocortex evolved primarily to manage the complexity of social relationships, tracking who is allied with whom, who owes what, who can be trusted. This runs continuously, requiring genuine attention and energy. Wiesner's study of 174 Jew/Hawan-Z conversations, published in PNAS in 2014, found that daytime talk was dominated by economic matters and social regulation, complaints, disputes, logistics. Stories made up only 6% of daytime conversation. But at night, by the fire, 81% of conversations were stories about people, past events, distant places, the spirit world. That wasn't recreation. It was social knowledge maintenance, keeping everyone's mental model of the group current and calibrated. This was work. It just didn't look like work. Social labor, maintaining relationships, tracking obligations, resolving conflict, never stopped. It just didn't look like a job. Fire. One of the most underestimated tasks in prehistoric life is fire maintenance. Fire required ongoing attention. Letting it go out was a serious problem. Relighting from scratch through friction methods was time-consuming and not always successful. Someone had to tend it at night. Someone had to collect fuel regularly. In arid environments like the Kalahari, finding sufficient firewood could require significant travel, especially in dry seasons when nearby wood had been exhausted. Fire also created work through cooking. Richard Wrangham of Harvard has argued that cooking, which dramatically increases the caloric yield of food, was the key driver of human brain evolution. But cooking takes time, tending the fire, managing heat, waiting. The labor cost was real, even if the nutritional payoff was transformative. Now let's look at the full picture and what it actually says about prehistoric life. When you add up food acquisition, food processing, tool making, hide processing, shelter construction, childcare, social maintenance, and fire management, you get roughly 40 to 45 hours of work per week in most well-studied hunter-gatherer societies. But here is what that number doesn't capture: the texture of those hours. In the AGTA study, the most methodologically rigorous time budget study of a contemporary hunter-gatherer group, adults averaged around 30 hours of daylight leisure time per week. Not downtime forced by exhaustion, actual leisure. Leisure that coexisted with work, interleaved with it throughout the day, rather than separated from it into a distinct after-hours block. Work didn't start at 9 and end at 5. It started when something needed doing and stopped when the need was met. Tool repair happened during conversations. Childcare happened during food processing. Storytelling happened while hides dried. The tasks were real and demanding, but they were embedded in life rather than extracted from it. 40 to 45 hours of work, but 30 hours of daylight leisure alongside it. Not after work, during it, woven in. There's a broader question hiding inside all of this data. Why does it matter how prehistoric humans spent their time? It matters because our bodies and brains were shaped by that time allocation, by millions of years of that specific distribution of physical activity, social engagement, and cognitive demand. We didn't evolve to sit at desks for 8 consecutive hours. We didn't evolve to perform invisible tasks whose results we can't see. We didn't evolve to maintain hundreds of shallow digital relationships while having no one to share food with at the end of the day. The data from hunter-gatherer time budgets isn't a blueprint for how modern life should work. It's a map of what our biology was calibrated for. And understanding the gap between that calibration and current conditions is, arguably, one of the more useful things anthropology has to offer anyone alive today. The tug many people feel toward manual work, toward visible results, toward unstructured social time, toward being outside and moving, that isn't nostalgia. It's the operating system running underneath, noticing the mismatch. 30 hours of leisure per week woven into a day of meaningful physical and social work. Something edible at the end of it, a fire in the evening, someone telling a story. It's not a bad design for a life. We just don't make it very easy to live anymore. Let me go a bit deeper on 2 things that usually get skipped. First, the knowledge economy of the prehistoric world. In the prehistoric world, knowledge was the primary form of wealth, but it wasn't owned. It circulated through the group. The person who knew which plants were toxic and which were edible saved lives. The person who could read animal behavior saved the hunt. The person who remembered where water could be found during a drought from 30 years earlier might be the reason 20 people survived. This knowledge lived in people. It was transmitted through demonstration, through story, through the long apprenticeship of watching and gradually taking on more responsibility. The grandmother hypothesis, developed by anthropologist Kristen Hawkes at the University of Utah, proposes that the unusual human pattern of post-reproductive longevity evolved precisely because older women, grandmothers, increased grandchild survival through food provisioning and knowledge transfer. Menopause isn't a biological glitch. It's an adaptation that freed older women from reproduction so they could invest in the knowledge economy of the group. Second, leisure was not passive. The 30 hours of leisure time documented in the AGTA study, or the afternoon downtime observed among the Hadza, was not primarily spent lying still and doing nothing. It was spent in social activity, conversation, grooming, play, storytelling, music, dancing. These activities served real functions. They maintained relationships, transmitted cultural knowledge, resolved tensions, and reinforced group cohesion. Polly Wiesner's research on the Kung documented the shift between daytime and nighttime conversation modes. Daytime: practical, tense, logistical. Nighttime at the fire: stories, laughter, songs. The nighttime mode wasn't just entertainment, it was relationship maintenance at scale, a way for the entire group to stay emotionally synchronized, socially calibrated, and culturally connected. In a group where your survival depended on 30 people choosing to cooperate with each other, the social fabric wasn't a luxury. It was infrastructure, and maintaining it was work, even when it felt like play. Leisure wasn't passive. It was social infrastructure maintenance, the work of keeping a group of people willing to cooperate with each other. One more thing. The distribution of labor in prehistoric groups was not equal, but it was not arbitrary either. The sexual division of labor was real and documented across virtually all hunter-gatherer societies studied. Men hunted more, women gathered more. Men ranged further, women stayed closer to camp. But the reasons for this division were ecological and biological, not ideological. The GPS data from 2078 Days of Hadza Movement, published in Nature Human Behavior in 2021, showed that men traveled further and on more unpredictable routes because they were tracking mobile, dispersed prey. Women traveled on more predictable routes because the resources they harvested were fixed in location, but finding them required detailed, accumulated knowledge of terrain. And critically, both contributions were essential. The Cambridge study of the Agta found that women's gathered food provided the reliable caloric foundation that kept the group fed, even during the many days when hunters returned empty-handed. In most hunter-gatherer societies, women's contribution to caloric intake equaled or exceeded men's. The dominant hunter narrative isn't supported by the data. Women's gathered food typically provided as many or more calories than men's hunted food. Both contributions were essential. Neither was optional. What does all of this add up to? Prehistoric humans worked roughly 40 to 45 hours per week, about the same as us. But the nature of those hours was fundamentally different. Every task had a visible, concrete output. Every skill was directly connected to survival. Work happened inside social life, not separated from it. Specialization existed, but was embedded in community rather than abstracted into a labor market. And running alongside that work, woven into it, 30 hours per week of genuine leisure, social time, story time, fire time. The human mind and body were calibrated for that combination. Physical work with visible results, deep familiarity with a small number of people, regular unstructured time, something to eat at the end that you help produce. None of that is available as a package deal anymore. But understanding what the package originally looked like is probably the first step toward figuring out what's missing.